Hello, my friends. Let's say you've gone through a few rounds of evolution in tech, and a lot of the things you've learned have subsequently become obsolete because of changes in versions or changes in fads or whatnot. So, if you want to start making the move to a platform that will never let you down, and I'm not talking about as a desktop, I'm talking about as a subsystem tool, it's time to look at Linux. And if you have any Windows systems sitting around, it makes for a good host for Linux. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going to just reset my system to default, which is something you can do on any system that you have from the past up to about 7 or 8 years old. So we'll do a local install, and hopefully if you have a system you're trying to bring back to health, you can do it this simply as well. It should be able to use all your files from off of your local install. Now, if you've crashed really hard, sometimes you have to find a product key and type it in exactly as it appears, and that often requires being able to log into your Microsoft login from another machine. So it's kind of chicken and egg if it's your only system. But if it's not your only system, you can log in from somewhere else using your Microsoft login, the one you probably had to use when logging into Windows for the first time, and get back your Windows product key for that particular piece of hardware. Each hardware has its own. Now, I've already done that type of recovery. That preceded this. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm resetting one more time because I've updated my, I guess it's going to be called perhaps White Rabbit Linux or Rabbit Hole Linux. Right, that's it. It's going to be Rabbit Hole Linux. I've gone through a number of names in the past, and none of them have stuck really well. And I had to update the Drink Me script, basically, to get back in sync with Microsoft's update of using a new version of Ubuntu as their default Linux under Windows. So Windows does not ship with Linux. However, it ships what you would call Linux ready. So on any Windows 10 or 11 system that's updated to the latest, you have to allow all the updates to have applied. You can open a command line or a PowerShell, and you can type WSL space minus minus install. You know how some commands have those double hyphened parameters. So it's WSL, which is the command, and then a space, and then the parameter or argument install, which has the two minus signs or hyphens in front of it. So once you do that, Windows will install a local copy of Linux running simultaneous. This is not a multi-boot system. This is not something you have to switch back and forth between. It just becomes another type of terminal window, another type of text terminal window you can open for the most part, for most people. It does also support Linux graphics, but it is not being billed as a replacement for a Linux desktop. It simply has compatibility for Linux graphical software, the way the old Wine package added Windows support under Linux. So this is going the other direction. It's a little bit more fancy because it taps into Microsoft's ability to run multiple simultaneous operating systems and to divvy out resources in all kinds of fancy ways, because when Microsoft had phased out Windows 95, there are some major upgrades of Windows. It goes back to like 3.1. That was a big upgrade from what came before, and it became what most people would consider usable. And then after 3.1, Windows 95 was the next major upgrade. However, it was not nearly good enough to um, be secure in the age of the internet and the web. So, not long after that, Windows NT came along, which stands for Next Technology, I think it is, something along those lines. But it's a much more deep upgrade than it appeared, and its innovations trickled all throughout. It trickled out to the beloved Windows 2000 server, and somewhere not long after that, Vista came along and I guess refined that a little bit, although people would argue against that. But those refinements then hit a beloved version, Windows 8. So the big hallmark versions were, I suppose, 3.1, Windows 95, NT, Windows 2000, Windows 8. And then after that, it went through a similar, halting upgrade, going through Metro and then to Windows 10, which was another beloved version. And now, in my opinion, it's on another one of those hiccupy, fraught-ridden upgrade cycles. The changes that Windows 11 introduces are not big enough for the muscle memory that it ruins or breaks. So I guess I'll let you see me a little bit as I'm shooting this silly video. I shoot some of the silly ones. It doesn't matter. I'm not one of these polished YouTubers. So I have this ruler because I was measuring how much of the screen this way is 9 by 16, the approximately TikTok or YouTube short format. So in centimeters, I guess we do vertical first because that would be the 16. And it actually is 19. So that's close enough to 16 that you hardly even need to do the math, right? So you got 9 by 16, so you go out to 9, and then you can just go back a little bit. You can do it visually proportional. You don't have to do the actual math. So it's about 8.5 centimeters. So I can always lift this up and say, just about 8 is going to be how much a TikTok video will occupy. So I'm putting my TikTok videos and my YouTube shorts in a space like right there. So I guess for posterity's sake, I am going to go through this entire Windows reset. It's not something that's shown on YouTube a lot. And the way people show their gaming and their streaming and stuff, I figure why not? Especially if I keep a audio track going, it can be tagged as listenable, I think they say. I'll probably go get myself a Pepsi. Yeah, and hang on right there. I got more to talk about. Okay, for the kind of developer issues and stuff I do, for the kind of real-time, I guess streaming type stuff, well, that screen is filthy. So what? Doesn't matter for this purpose here. I'll wipe it down. Maybe some of you folks are sensitive to that. So I am switching to this soft surfaced Microsoft touchscreen. This is really awesome with the stylus. It works in combination great. To be my Windows 10 system. This is my traditional Windows 10 system for the past couple of years. Now this was my Windows 11 system. And you can see I've got a cracked screen here. And it's actually got more memory, and it's this all black one. So I would call this Darth laptop. It was a pretty cool laptop. And when this system suffered a catastrophic crash, I had that other system ready to go. So I was able to make the transition pretty seamlessly. However, a combination of not being able to look at that cracked screen and hating Windows 11 and not wanting to risk downgrading that system and lose both my laptops. I actually have a third one from work, a Mac one, which is so I can stay multi-platform. I decided to properly recover this one. Now, properly recovering this one wasn't easy. I had to find the product key, which was a whole rigmarole. But I found it, I entered it in, I got it correct, and I was able to, I guess it was a cloud install. I was able to do a remote Windows 10 cloud install. And I did all my updates, and it tried to push Bing on me, right smack there in the center. It was amazing. Just when you think you've reverted to Windows 10, stripped down, got that really old school Windows 10 sparseness. It'll never be that old school sparse because you can't go back to that old of a version of Windows 10 unless you've got some local disks for it or something. Because what you get from Microsoft, and then especially after you update it, is never going to be like those early versions of Windows 10 with that blue misty background and everything is just so snappy and fast. Boy, on modern hardware, because I've done that a few times, if you run that on modern hardware, it feels like you're on this super snappy high-speed system, faster than your PC's ever felt. It's what they describe your PC feels like when you install Linux on the metal. So Linux on the metal is another story. I'm certainly going to be covering it, and I've got some followers out there, some YouTube viewers, and I consider them friends at this point, who are very much pushing me in that direction because everything I advocate can be done at a much lower cost if you're not on Windows-capable hardware. However, saturation, market share. If you're not talking about Windows hardware, what are you talking about? The smattering of Chromebooks that are out there? If you want to hit, the most people and do the most good, you've got to be talking about the Windows platform, because combining Windows 10 and 11 together is the #1 dominant platform. It's what most people have. There's still always like a 10% or so share of Mac users. However, and they are elite and they are vocal. However, the story is different enough, and they're rich. So I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for the masses. Mac people can figure out how to get Linux on their Macs as a subsystem, which is completely doable. Macs have the same hypervisor type hardware capabilities as Windows machines do. It's just that the NT operating system is really well suited for this hypervisor land. So NT is really what's underneath most modern Windows operating systems, which allows it to have a third operating system. So, you're running Windows, you're going to be running the Windows subsystem for Linux, so you'll have Linux running on there. But then there's another operating system that kind of moderates all that. On the free and open source world, I think that's called the virtual stack. There's OpenStack, and they call that instance the DOM. Another use of those three letters that's overused in tech. But there's always a lightweight operating system because something has to, run the hypervisor. The hypervisor doesn't run in a vacuum. There is an operating system there. So there is a invisible, in the background, meta operating system that is the hypervisor. And under that is both Windows and Linux. Now, to make matters even more insane, That's 3 operating systems. There is, in fact, a fourth in the picture in the form of Minix, and it's a Unix operating system that's embedded, and it's the thing managing your sleep mode. You know, when your PC goes to sleep and wakes up so well, that's not being done in a vacuum either. There's yet another little computer controlling all your computer's resources, even when your computer's off, including an active network connection. They call it a stack. So on your PC, on your typical, before you even do the Linux stuff, there's at least 2 operating systems, 3 if you know, because the hypervisor isn't turned on. So if you have a stock, fresh installed Windows system, there's about 2 operating systems on there. The obvious Windows one, and then the Minix one, which is a tiny Unix to control system operations that are outside the powered up system. The moment you do the type of work I'm advocating, it turns the hypervisor on. So that's at least 2 more operating systems, the hypervisor itself and whatever you're using it to run side by side with Windows. All right. So why am I doing this reset after that previous reset? Well, it's because in the time between the last time I've done this kind of work and now, Microsoft has gone ahead and upgraded their default Ubuntu, which is a version of Linux. So when you install Linux under Windows, it has to use a distribution, a particular distribution, and the one it chose is called Ubuntu, and it's an excellent version. It's one of the more commercial, supporting of many drivers type versions, because that's the problem. It's one of the many problems with Linux, because there's not the big financial incentive as a game platform as there is with Windows. Not a lot of money goes into it. I mean, it's changing a little bit with the Steam engine and all that, but for many years, with that one whopping exception, few people have wanted to put the money into developing drivers for Linux, because where's the return on investment? It takes a lot of money to support hardware. When you write software that uses interoperable layer stuff and it's targeting lots of platforms, you can get a pretty good return on your software investment, because first, there's not as much material costs in software. You don't have to go through the whole, I guess, it used to be cutting a die and committing it to metal. There's probably other terminology these days of on-demand 3D printing and stuff. But still, you got to do the 3D printing. Software is kind of more hocus pocus, information-based. Sorry about the sirens in the background. So, it's expensive to target lots of different hardware if you're not allowing your software to kind of be thunked down to a lowest common denominator of capabilities that can survive the migration between different platforms. It's actually pretty rare that you can actually write software to survive that platform to platform jump. Just ask Netflix. The devil is in the details, I believe they would tell you. Now, web, purely web stuff, and web stuff that targets a very generic mobile platform with those little hamburger navigations and approximately the same capabilities as Safari, mobile Safari and mobile Chrome have, is a nice way to go multi-platform. But how fancy can your applications really get then? Can you do a 3D shoot 'em up game? So there's different engines, 3D engines, 3 environments that have been developed for different platforms so that the games port easily. That's a very common trick, making some sort of engine or runtime. It's the way the Java programming language works. It's one of the things that drove its popularity so much. You write a virtual machine that has its own set of specifications, and then you can port that virtual machine to different platforms, and anything written for the virtual machine then ports easily. Now, the problem always is that of user interface and the subtlety and nuance. You know, they used to call that stuff shovelware because you just shoveled the code from one platform to the other. As an old Amiga computer fan, we all were opposed to that because games that reached the Amiga from the PC rarely took advantage of the Amiga's increased capabilities, and you always felt a little bit ripped off. Now, the reverse is true. When software went from the Amiga to the PC platform, the PC versions were nowhere nearly as good as the Amiga versions. They couldn't be. The hardware didn't support the same graphics and features. So, one of the big tricks in tech is deciding where you're happy feature wise. What do you need out of your platform for you to be happy? Now, if you're willing to be in this forever shifting and changing consumer mode, user interfaces change, you're expected to learn the new rules of the game, then you're fine because that's where you're investing your time. You're investing your time on somewhere where you know that developing expertise is not going to come back to you as any sort of return on your investment, except perhaps for the entertainment value in the moment, which does have value, but I'm not a gamer. I like my skills to get forever better over time so that when the world changes around me, my hammer still works like a hammer and my saw still works like a saw. It's surprisingly possible after large upgrades of operating systems or JavaScript framework trends for your hammer to no longer work like a hammer and your saw to no longer work like a saw. And then you're kind of thrown into this relearn everything quickly mode, retrain or die. The hamster wheel, the rat race. Now, I've gone through my fair share of that stuff, and coming on like 40 years old, I'm 52 now. But as I was approaching 40, I realized I could not stay in the young person's game of constantly starting from scratch. A complete wiping of the slate is done on occasion. You'll feel that especially when you switch between platforms in a major way, switching from Mac to Windows or Windows to Mac, or same with mobile platforms, going from iOS to Android or from Android to iOS. You will feel lost for a while. Now, software goes through the same thing as platforms. There's a whole generation of macro media flash game developers. It just destroyed their career, at least temporarily. They had to change gears. They could not continue getting paid for the kind of work they were doing, which was highly tied to proprietary formats, proprietary tools on proprietary platforms. And Steve Jobs deciding not to support Flash on the iPhone just ended that chapter and started a new chapter of people getting into Objective-C. Now, look how much people have invested into Objective-C. They're platform bound. They cannot adapt that knowledge and know-how easily to other platforms. And it's a difficult platform in the first place, so Apple solved that with Swift, taking a lot from the Python and similar communities and creating a yet another proprietary language for the Apple ecosystem. Now, if you're in the moment and, even if it's, up to 5 year windows you're looking at, and you're willing for everything to be reset every 5 years or so and to be beholden to a particular platform, that's fine. But if you're looking for kind of a broader, improve your skills for life, even in technology, forget 5 year stretches. Can we look at 10-year, 20-year stretches? Can a hammer still be a hammer in 20 years in tech? The answer, stunningly, is yes. It's not all through tech, but there are little gems that people talk about today. It's active, it's even actively developed still today, even though these tools are quite static in their essential nature so as to not upset your muscle memory. They continue to be aggressively developed to embrace the changes in the world from artificial intelligence, right? And from supporting new hardware and meeting user expectations of more advanced features. So these things are really Linux, a platform, the foundation on which you build applications. Python, a programming language, which is more and more becoming the lingua franca of tech. You might think JavaScript, but no, JavaScript's never going to become kind of like the built-in operating system language the way Perl did once with Linux. So every distribution of Linux included Perl because no one wanted to write all their little automation scripts in what was called Unix scripts, or perhaps Bash, or some version of Unix script, which let you do automations, but it was not a very love-worthy environment. So people like to replace it with a more general purpose language. And for many years, Perl was that language. Python has been systematically replacing Perl in most distros of Linux. It's either instead of Perl or in addition to, because many system automation tasks these days, Python is the language of choice. Both from a web perspective, you wouldn't think so, but many, many things are back-ended by Python and not necessarily JavaScript. To system DevOps, they like to call it DevOps, developer operations, because it's not entirely network admins and sysadmins like it used to be.
Hi there, I'm Cortana,
Hi,
and
Cortana.
I'm here to help. A little sign in here, a touch of Wi-Fi there, and we'll have your PC ready for all you plan to do.
Well, thank you, Cortana.
Use your voice or the keyboard along the way, and if you'd like me to stay quiet, just select the little microphone icon towards the bottom of your screen.
Normally I would.
If you need an assistive screen reader, press the Windows, Control, and Enter keys at the same time to turn on narrator. Okay, enough intro. Let's dig in. Your region is set to the United States. Your keyboard is set to... Do you also type with another keyboard? Now let's get you connected to a network. That way you can get updates, apps, and cat videos as soon as possible. Now type your credentials.
It's gonna be a minute. I wish there was a pause button on this, but there's not. So I'll be right back. Okay, I got it on Wi-Fi. It's doing what it's saying is some important setup. Hopefully I still won't have to edit this. I like to do these as one take.
The legal.
And so far this has been about a half hour to reset. I'll have a good time.
Type your email address or phone number, then follow the instructions to sign in. I'll catch up with you once that's done. You've asked for extra verification. Good call. Follow the instructions, and I'll meet you back here once you're done.
I wish there was a pause on this.